When my phone rang that afternoon, I almost ignored it. I was standing in my small kitchen, waiting for the kettle to whistle, sunlight spilling across the worn wooden counter I had owned longer than my son had been alive. Life at 62 had become predictable in a way I once found comforting. Quiet mornings, part-time shifts at the local library, evenings with books and herbal tea. No chaos, no surprises. Then I saw my son's name on the screen. Derek. I smiled without thinking and answered, "Hello, sweetheart." There was no greeting on the other end, no warmth, no hesitation. "Mom, I'm getting married tomorrow," he said quickly, as if reading from a checklist. "I've already withdrawn the money from your accounts and sold the house. Everything's handled. You'll need to move out soon. Bye." The line went dead. For a moment, I just stared at my phone, waiting for it to ring again, waiting for laughter, for a just kidding, for anything that made sense. Instead, the kettle screamed behind me, sharp and angry. I turned it off with shaking hands and sat down at the kitchen table. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my mind refused to accept what my ears had just heard. My name is Margaret Hale, and I had spent 37 years building my life carefully, patiently, sacrifice by sacrifice. I raised my only child alone after his father passed away when Derek was 12. I worked double shifts, I skipped vacations, I wore coats until they frayed at the sleeves. Every decision I made had one goal: give my son a better life. And now, according to a 30-second phone call, that life had been erased. 3 months earlier, the warning signs had been there. Quiet, subtle, easy to dismiss. Derek had called asking for my banking details. Just to help set up automatic payments, he'd said, in case you forget something. His voice had been smooth, reassuring, full of concern. I remember hesitating, my fingers tight around the phone. But he was my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the man I thought I knew. 6 weeks after that, he came to visit with his fiancée, Lena. She was young, 26 maybe, beautiful in a sharp, polished way that made my stomach tighten. While Derek talked, her eyes wandered over the furniture, the framed photographs, the antique clock on the wall. "This area must be worth a fortune now," she said casually. "Property values have exploded." "It's my home. I'm not selling." Derek laughed too quickly. "She's just curious, Mom." But something in his expression unsettled me. A flicker. Calculation. The real blow came on a Sunday morning in late October. I logged into my bank account like I always did, coffee in hand. The number on the screen didn't make sense. I refreshed the page. Again. My savings, $124,000, the result of decades of discipline and my husband's life insurance, was almost gone. My checking account showed less than $60. I called the bank. The representative spoke gently, professionally. "The transfers were authorized through your online access, Mrs. Hale. The funds were moved to an account under Derek Hale's name." I hung up without saying goodbye. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat perfectly still for hours, staring at the wall, replaying every moment I had ever defended my son, every excuse I had made for him, every instinct I had ignored. And now he had called to tell me, cheerfully, that he'd taken everything. But here's what Derek didn't know. The house he claimed to have sold, the one he believed was my only property, it wasn't the home I lived in. And the moment that truth settled in my chest, my laughter returned, slow, cold, deliberate, because my son hadn't just betrayed me. He had made the worst mistake of his life. My son thought he had left me penniless and homeless with one phone call. What he didn't know was that he had just stepped into a legal trap, one I had spent years unknowingly preparing for him. After Derek's call ended, I stayed seated at my kitchen table for a long time, letting the silence settle. My laughter faded, replaced by something colder and steadier. Panic would have been useless. Tears would have solved nothing. What I needed now was clarity. So I asked myself one simple question. What had I actually lost? The money, yes, that hurt more than I wanted to admit. That savings account wasn't luxury money. It was security, medical care, independence, the promise I had made to myself that I would never become a burden to anyone, especially my own child. But the house? That was where Derek had miscalculated. 15 years earlier, when I was still working full-time, I had purchased a small 2-bedroom property on Oak Street. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. I rented it out to a quiet family, the Wilsons, who had lived there responsibly for years and recently renewed their lease. That house was in my name. The home I lived in now, the one I was sitting in, was something else entirely. It belonged to a family trust created by my late mother-in-law. The trust held the title, not me personally. I was the trustee and beneficiary, but legally speaking, that property was invisible to anyone who didn't understand its structure. Derek didn't understand. He had assumed the rental property was my only asset. He had sold it thinking he was clever. Instead, he had created a legal nightmare. I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled Oak Street Property. Inside were lease agreements, payment records, insurance documents, and the original deed. Everything was in order. Everything was documented. If Derek had sold that property without disclosing the active lease, the buyers would soon discover they couldn't move in. They would sue. If he had claimed authority he didn't legally possess, the title company would investigate. And if he had forged documents, my stomach tightened. Because I had never given him power of attorney. Not once. Not ever. I checked my records carefully. No signed authorization, no notarized forms, nothing. Which meant either Derek was lying or Derek had done something far worse. The next morning, I called the bank again. This time, not as a confused mother, but as a woman reporting a crime. I need to report fraudulent withdrawals from my accounts, I said calmly, and I need a complete transaction history. The representative didn't hesitate. We'll begin an investigation immediately, Mrs. Hale. Then I made my second call. Martin Ellis, a quiet, sharp attorney I knew through my book club. He had listened to countless discussions about novels and poetry, but when I explained what had happened, his tone shifted instantly. "This is serious," he said. "Very serious. Come to my office today." By noon, I was sitting across from him as he reviewed my documents. He removed his glasses slowly and leaned back in his chair. "Margaret," he said, "your son didn't just steal money, he committed fraud. If the property sale involved forged authority, he's looking at criminal charges." The word criminal echoed in my head. I didn't want to ruin my son's life. I never had. But I also wasn't willing to let him destroy mine. "What are my options?" I asked. Martin was honest. "You can report everything immediately, or you can gather more evidence and confront him first. But understand this, if you do nothing, he'll do it again. People who cross this line rarely stop on their own." That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "Why is the bank calling me? What did you tell them?" I stared at the screen, then typed back, "The truth." Seconds later, my phone rang. "Mom," he said sharply, "this is unnecessary. Just tell them it's fine." "You took my savings without permission," I replied evenly. "I borrowed it," he snapped. "We'll pay it back." "And the house?" Silence. "You said you had power of attorney," I continued. "Show it to me." "You signed it last year," he said quickly, "when you were sick." My heart sank. I remembered the hospital, the fever, the fog, Derek sitting beside my bed, papers in hand. "I need to see those documents," I said. "Stop being difficult," he replied. "The wedding is tomorrow." That was when I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was betrayal, planned, deliberate, and justified in his mind. I ended the call and looked around my living room. Everything I had worked for still stood around me. He hadn't won, not even close.
My son believed I would panic, apologize, and back down. Instead, I hired a lawyer, opened an investigation, and uncovered proof that turned his perfect wedding into a ticking bomb.
The morning of Derek's wedding arrived wrapped in false brightness. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom window, warm and gentle, as if the world hadn't shifted beneath my feet. I stood in front of my mirror longer than usual, smoothing the fabric of a navy blue dress I hadn't worn in years. I looked composed, calm, almost proud. No one would have guessed that the money paying for crystal chandeliers, catered meals, and champagne towers had been taken from my savings. No one would have known that the groom had committed fraud to fund the celebration, and that was exactly how I wanted it. When I arrived at the country club, everything sparkled. White roses lined the aisle. Guests laughed easily, unaware of the rot beneath the surface. Derek spotted me immediately and hurried over, relief flooding his face. "Mom, you came!" he said, hugging me tightly. "I knew you would." I returned the hug, steady and measured. "Congratulations," I said. "You look happy." He did, radiant even, the kind of happiness that comes from believing you've outsmarted everyone. Lena joined us, her smile sharp but polished. "Margaret, it's so nice of you to be here," she said. "Derek was worried he'd be upset." "Why would I be?" I replied softly. Her eyes flickered, just for a moment. The ceremony passed in a blur. I watched my son promise loyalty and honesty, the irony almost unbearable. I clapped when expected, smiled for photos, and sipped champagne I couldn't taste. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Martin. Title company flagged irregularities. Funds from Oak Street sale frozen. Buyers notified. Police report being prepared. I exhaled slowly. The clock had started ticking. Derek remained blissfully unaware through the reception, laughing with friends, toasting his future, dancing with his bride. I watched him from across the room, wondering how a child I once taught right from wrong could stand so comfortably inside a lie. 3 days later, the illusion shattered. They showed up at my door together, unannounced. Derek's face was flushed with anger. Lena's eyes were cold, calculating. "What did you do?" Derek demanded as soon as he stepped inside. "The title company froze everything. They're saying the sale was fraudulent." I closed the door calmly. "If the documents were forged," I said, "then yes, it would be." "You signed them," he insisted. "I was hospitalized and delirious. You told me they were insurance forms." Lena stepped forward. "You're old, Margaret. You don't remember things clearly. Derek was helping you." "Helping me," I repeated, voice steady, "by draining my accounts and selling property without my consent?" She laughed bitterly. "Everything you had was going to be his someday anyway." That sentence landed harder than any insult. "So this was entitlement," I said quietly, "not necessity." Derek's voice dropped. "Mom, just tell them you approved everything. We can all move on." "And if I don't?" His jaw tightened. "Then we'll make this very difficult for you." There it was, the threat. "You'll ruin your own son," Lena added. "You'll be alone." I felt fear then, not of them, but of the truth settling into place. The boy I raised was gone. In his place stood someone who believed love meant access and family meant ownership. "Get out," I said. Derek stared at me. "You don't mean that." "I do. Leave." They left at a storm of anger and slammed doors. My hands shook after they were gone, not from doubt, but from grief. That night, I made the decision I had been avoiding. I called Martin. "File the police report," I said. "Press full charges." There was a pause. "Are you sure?" "Yes." The next weeks were brutal. Derek called, pleaded, apologized, then raged. Lena came alone once, offering partial repayment and promises of grandchildren, as if future children were bargaining chips. I refused everything.
Because remorse that appears only after consequences is not remorse at all. When the court date arrived, Derek chose to fight the charges. He believed a jury would side with a son over a mother. He believed I would break under pressure. He was wrong again. My son thought love would save him from consequences. But when the courtroom doors opened, truth replaced sentiment, and the lies he'd built his life on began to collapse.
The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, though the air conditioning hummed relentlessly, but emotionally. Every bench, every polished surface seemed designed to strip sentiment from the situation. This wasn't a place for family history or shared memories. It was a place for facts. Derek sat across the aisle from me in a dark suit that didn't quite hide the tension in his shoulders. Lena sat beside him, her posture rigid, her expression carefully blank. When our eyes met, he looked away first. The prosecutor, Andrea Collins, wasted no time. This case, she explained, wasn't about a family disagreement. It was about financial exploitation, fraud, and forgery. And the evidence, she promised the jury, would be clear. Derek's attorney painted a different picture. He suggested I was confused, influenced, a lonely older woman resentful of her son's marriage. According to him, Derek had acted with permission, my permission, and I was now rewriting history. I felt anger rise, but I stayed still. Truth didn't need theatrics. Witness after witness took the stand. The bank representative testified that I had reported the missing funds immediately, distressed and shocked. Transaction records showed the money had been transferred directly into Derek's account. No ambiguity, no gray area. Then the title company representative spoke. She explained how the power of attorney document raised red flags. The notary stamp was expired, the dates didn't align, the signature didn't match my usual handwriting. A handwriting expert confirmed it. The signature shows signs of impairment, he said, consistent with illness or confusion. That was when I saw Lena's composure crack. Then it was my turn. I stood, raised my hand, and swore to tell the truth. Andrea guided me gently, allowing me to explain my life, my relationship with Derek, the trust I had placed in him. Did you authorize your son to withdraw $124,000 from your savings? She asked. No, I said clearly. Did you authorize the sale of the Oak Street property? No. Did you knowingly sign a power of attorney granting him control over your assets? No. Derek's attorney tried to shake me during cross-examination. You're unhappy about his marriage, aren't you? I told him this has nothing to do with his marriage. It has everything to do with theft. You live alone. Isn't it possible you misunderstood what you agreed to? Being independent does not mean being incompetent. The jury watched closely. I could feel it. The story wasn't unraveling the way Derek had hoped. Then it was his turn. At first, he sounded convincing. Concerned son, overwhelmed by responsibility, trying to help his aging mother. But under Andrea's questioning, the cracks appeared. Emails? None. Texts? Deleted. Authority? Unprovable. Then came the question that broke him. Mr. Hale, Andrea asked calmly, how did a notary in another state witness your mother's signature in an Ohio hospital? Derek froze. I don't know, he stammered. Isn't the truth, she pressed, that you forged that document after misleading your mother? His face drained of color. Words failed him. The jury didn't miss it. By the time closing arguments ended, I felt strangely calm. I had told the truth. That was all I could do. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the room held its breath. On the count of grand theft, guilty. On the count of fraud, guilty. On the count of forgery, guilty. Derek collapsed into his chair. Lena covered her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply closed my eyes and let the weight of it settle. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded forward. How do you feel? One asked. I spoke carefully.
Justice doesn't stop being justice just because the person who committed the crime is family. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. 2 weeks for Derek to understand that love does not erase accountability. 2 weeks for me to grieve the son I thought I had raised. The verdict was only the beginning. In 2 weeks, the judge would decide whether my son would walk free or lose everything he tried to steal from me. The 2 weeks between the verdict and sentencing felt heavier than the entire trial. Derek called twice. The first time, his voice was small, almost childlike. "Mom, please, I know I was wrong. I didn't think it would go this far." I listened in silence. The second time, the anger returned. "You didn't have to destroy me like this." That call ended with me staring at the phone long after the line went dead, realizing how completely he still misunderstood what had happened. I hadn't destroyed him. I had refused to lie to protect him. The sentencing hearing was quieter than the trial. No reporter shouting questions, no dramatic arguments, just consequences. The judge, Evelyn Morrison, listened patiently as victim statements were read. The tenants from Oak Street spoke about the fear of losing their home. The buyers described financial chaos and legal stress. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. "My son was my world," I said. I trusted him completely. What he did wasn't just theft. It was a violation of trust that can never be fully repaired. Derek's attorney pleaded for leniency, youth, stress, poor judgment, a promising future. Then Derek spoke. "I betrayed my mother," he said, tears spilling freely now. "I let greed and fear guide me. I accept responsibility." For the first time, his words sounded real. The judge folded her hands. "Mr. Hale," she said, "this court recognizes remorse when it is present, but remorse does not erase intent. You exploited your mother's illness, forged documents, and committed fraud across multiple systems. These were calculated decisions." She paused. "You are sentenced to 6 years in state prison, eligible for parole after 4. Full restitution is ordered." Derek's knees buckled. Lena let out a sharp sob. I remained still. Prison guards led my son away in handcuffs. He turned once, eyes searching mine. I didn't wave. I didn't look away. I nodded. Afterward, Martin explained the restitution process. Assets frozen, the condo sold, wages garnished when possible. It would take years, but the money would come back. Over the following months, consequences rippled outward. Derek lost his job permanently, his professional licenses were revoked, friends disappeared, letters stopped coming. Lena filed for divorce before the first year ended. Meanwhile, my life changed in quieter ways. I started speaking at community centers about financial abuse. Older women approached me with trembling hands and familiar stories. "I thought it was just me," they said. I told them it wasn't. Standing up for yourself isn't cruelty. It's survival. 6 months later, I traveled for the first time in decades. I laughed more, slept better, built a life defined not by sacrifice, but by choice. I still thought about Derek. Prison changes people. Sometimes it breaks them. Sometimes it teaches them what love actually costs. I hoped, quietly, that he would learn. The sentence ended my son's freedom, but it didn't end the story. Years later, a single letter would arrive that forced me to face the hardest question of all. The letter arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. No warning, no drama, just a plain white envelope with my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. I knew who it was from before I opened it. Derek. I sat at the same kitchen table where his phone call had shattered my life, holding the envelope for a long time. 3 years had passed since the sentencing, 3 years of silence, distance, and rebuilding. I had grown stronger in that time, stronger than the woman I had been when I answered that call. Finally, I opened it. He didn't ask for money. That alone surprised me. Instead, he wrote about prison, about isolation, about losing everything he thought defined him. He admitted, without excuses, that what he had done was calculated, that he had convinced himself I would forgive him no matter what.
That entitlement had felt normal until it cost him his freedom. He wrote, "I didn't steal because I needed to," he wrote. "I stole because I believed I was owed." That sentence hurt more than any insult he had ever thrown at me. He wrote that Lena had left, that his friends had vanished, that prison forced him to sit alone with his choices every night. He didn't ask me to intervene or help. He didn't ask me to save him. He only asked one thing. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote, "but I hope one day you'll believe that I finally understand." I folded the letter and set it down. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. People think it means forgetting, excusing, pretending nothing happened. But real forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It doesn't reopen doors that were violently closed. Forgiveness, I learned, is about release. Not for them, for yourself. I didn't write back immediately. I waited weeks, making sure my response came from clarity, not guilt. When I finally did, my reply was short. "I'm glad you understand now. I forgive you for my own peace. But trust must be rebuilt, and some things cannot return to what they were." That was the truth. I continued my work helping older adults protect themselves from financial abuse. What began as a coping mechanism became a calling. I trained volunteers, partnered with legal clinics, watched people stand up for themselves for the first time in their lives. My pain had found purpose. On my 65th birthday, my house was filled with laughter. Friends, neighbors, people who had become family not by blood, but by respect. Looking around the room, I realized something profound. I was not alone. I never had been. Derek was released on parole after 4 years. He didn't come to my door. He didn't demand reconciliation. He sent a message instead. "I'm trying to live differently now. No expectations." That restraint told me more than any apology ever could. Some wounds heal into scars. Some scars remind you where your boundaries are. I no longer confuse love with sacrifice or loyalty with silence. I learned that protecting yourself is not betrayal, it is wisdom. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. You are not required to destroy yourself to keep someone else comfortable. You are not cruel for choosing accountability. And love without respect is not love at all. I lost a son the day he chose greed over integrity, but I found myself the day I refused to let guilt make me small. And that choice, painful as it was, gave me the rest of my life back. If the person who hurt you the most was someone you loved, would you choose guilt or would you choose yourself? Thank you for listening.